I'm Patrick Byers, Horticulture Field Specialist with University of Missouri Extension. Today we're here at the Blueberry Patch in southwest Missouri.
And I'm Elizabeth Wahle, University of Illinois Extension. And today Pat and I are going to talk about pruning blueberries. So Pat, let's talk about the anatomy of a blueberry bush and how it pertains to pruning.
Sure. So once a bush reaches this age, there's a mixture of shoots of different ages. And for a fruitful plant, you need roughly the same number of shoots that are 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, and 5 years old. And you can get a feel for how old a shoot is by looking at its appearance. The youngest shoots, the bark is very smooth. It's typically a light color. As the shoots age, they develop a gray scaly bark. And of course, the oldest shoots are the ones largest diameter, and they definitely have a gray scaly appearance. Now, of course, another thing to think about is fruitfulness on shoots of various ages.
And on blueberries, in pruning, it's really important to know where the fruit buds are. And on blueberry bushes, they tend to be on the towards the terminal ends of the main shoots, or even the laterals as well. And so when you do look at shoots, you can see that on the tip, the little fattened, rounded buds are going to be your fruitful or floral buds. And then the more pointy, more narrow buds that are further down, closer to the base of the laterals or the main branch, are the vegetative buds on there. So when you're pruning, you don't want to be taking off your tips, or you're taking off your crop as well.
It's true, and as you look at the age of a shoot, you can get a feel too by how much it's branched at the top. So if we were to look at this older shoot right here, lots of branches. We do have flowery buds, but they tend to be fairly small. Whereas a younger shoot, let's see, here's a good example. It too is branched, but not to that degree, and we have nice, productive, large flowery buds on the tips of these shoots.
So Pat, it kind of sounds like that you're alluding that maybe some of these older branches aren't as fruitful.
That's certainly true, and research and growers' experience has demonstrated that the most productive shoots on a blueberry bush, again, are those shoots that are 2 to 5 years old. And once a shoot gets beyond 5 years of age, it actually becomes a drain on the bush, and it's time to prune that shoot out.
Well, taking some of that, I think maybe we're going to move into our next step and actually start talking about some of those steps on how to avoid taking your crop off and also invigorate your plant so that it stays productive for many years.
So looking at this plant, Elizabeth, I see a lot of shoots. It just looks very dense to me, and I'm curious, when we're done pruning, it's not going to look like this. What are the benefits of pruning?
Well, it kind of goes back, the first one goes back to what you said about as the canes age, they become less productive and actually become a drain on the plant. So one of the benefits of pruning is to remove some of those older canes, which not only takes them out and takes the drain off the plant, but also it stimulates the growth of new canes, which are going to be much more productive. And so one of the other goals that we were working for is to actually open up the plant for sunlight penetration. And so we always want to have good sunlight for the development of flower buds and vegetative buds, and stimulating down to the crown these new growth of canes. But one of the things that we need to really talk about is the benefits that you have in terms of IPM. We're looking at this plant right now without its leaves on, and you know that if you were doing pesticide applications, you'd probably get pretty good coverage. But imagine this plant with its leaves on in season when you're trying to do some treatments for like SWD. We know that we need to have some really good coverage for that particular pest.
Yeah, and remember, when we talk about integrated pest management and the strategies that are available for a farmer to manage problems, you actually have to develop a plant that is conducive for IPM strategies. And as you said, opening up the structure is huge. It helps encourage rapid drying of the shoots and foliage and fruit after a rain or dew, which is definitely helpful from the standpoint of disease management. It opens up the structure so we have better air movement from the standpoint of insect issues. Spotted-winged Drosophila is always more of a problem on dense plants. And then, as you said, if we choose to use pesticide applications, having a good open structure enables us as farmers to get good coverage of the foliage, the developing fruit, and in fact the entire plant.
So Pat, we've kind of talked about, using pruning to keep your production up and also to keep a healthy plant and to aid in your IPM practices. Let's kind of talk about next what we actually remove. We're out here in the dormant season, and that would suggest when the best time to prune might be during the dormant season.
It's true, Elizabeth. And Much of the pruning we do with blueberries is a dormant season operation. We can clearly see the structure of the bush. We can see which shoots need to stay and which shoots need to go. We can identify broken shoots easily, and we can also identify disease shoots. So in general, much of our pruning is done during the dormant season, but of course there's better days than other days during the dormant season. And with blueberries, we typically try to do most of our pruning after the coldest part of the winter is past. So, sometime from say the 1st of February on. But if you've got a lot of bushes to prune, you have to back up from that date so that you can get the job done. And so you can start pruning earlier than that, but try to choose days that are dry days. Try to choose days where it's going to be dry for at least a day after you're finished pruning, and try to choose cold days as well. And always prune your older bushes before you prune your younger bushes.
That brings to mind one follow-up question on that. Let's say, like where we're at, there's a lot of blueberry bushes to prune, and you don't think that you're going to get them all pruned if you start in February. What are some of the disadvantages or possible drawbacks to pruning really early in the dormant season?
Well, if you prune too early, and we get warm periods of time, you can actually set up a situation where the plants begin to lose some hardiness, and that can have negative effects if it gets cold again after that warm spell. So again, try to wait as long as you can before you prune. Now, obviously you've got to get pruning done before you get much in the way of bud swell, because as you prune, you can possibly damage those swelling, developing flower buds, and you don't want to do that. So a good way to look at it is, figure out roughly how long it's going to take, assuming the weather's perfect, back up that much, and then give yourself at least an extra week beyond that for days where you can't get out and prune, and that's when you start pruning. Well, to do a good job of pruning, of course, you need the right tools, Elizabeth. Why don't you walk us through what we need to actually do the job of pruning?
Well, I think the first thing to understand and accept is that everyone has a personal preference for what their favorite pruning tool is, but there are some general rules. The larger the cut, the more steps up you have in the type of power that you're using. So for the smallest cuts, and I usually say those are, around no more than 1 inch diameter, or about, the distance of my index finger on there. And so those are good for hand pruners. And there are some things that you want to consider when you're purchasing your hand pruner, and one of them is how it fits your hand. And so I've got pruners here, and Pat has a set, and his are large, and let me lock these up so we can hold them, and mine are small. And so, when you're handling pruners, you want to open them up and put them in your hand, and you should be able to grasp the handles without stressing your hand. And so that's one of the ways to reduce repetitive action injury on your hand, is to not have a constant tension on your hand with small cuts. Now, some of the other beyond the basic hand pruner that you can consider, this set of pruners has a rolling handle, and so when you actually use them, as you squeeze them, the handle rolls with your fingers, again reducing stress on your hand. One of the other options that I like are what we call offset pruners. And so if you look at these are quite a bit offset. And so when you hand these, open these up and use them, your wrist is more of a straight angle, so that you have that less of that cocking on your wrist. So again, reducing more of that ergonomic flow on your pruners. So one of the other things that you might run across are the different types of hand pruners, and so the ones that we recommend are actually called bypass pruners, and they're called bypass because the two cutting blades actually pass each other. And you sharpen these, so that you have a good clean cut, and these are the ones that we actually recommend. Why? And the recommendation is over what we call these anvil pruners, and again, need to be incredibly sharp, but this actually does not, the blades don't cross, they actually come together. And so if you don't have an incredibly sharp blade, you can actually have crushing injury to where you've made a cut. So if you're keeping them incredibly sharp, good. But the bypass in general will give you a cleaner cut in pruning, so we prefer those.
What about our colleagues who are lefties?
They've thought of that. So if you're lefty, don't buy righties. So pruners are definitely rated as to whether they're for left-handers or right-handers.
Now, what about larger cuts? As we're pruning blueberries, obviously we're going to be taking out some large canes. What do we need for larger cuts?
Definitely. As I mentioned, the hand pruners are usually up to 1 inch, but beyond that, it's just really stressful painful on your hand. And so that's when you're going to step up to something like a lopper. And so you're holding one of the smaller size loppers that you can use if you need a little more reach. These usually will go all the way up to like these 36-inch loppers that are probably good up to maybe 3-inch cuts with ease. And there are some of them that have, you know, hinges in them to actually give you a little more power to them, but these just standard ones usually allow you up to a 3-inch cut.
Now occasionally we need to make really big cuts. What are we going to use for that?
Well, you can use your own manpower, and you can use something like a pruning saw. Those come in folding saws or regular, you know, tree saws that you can use, and those are intended, you know, to cut wood specifically for pruning. But if you have a lot of pruning, you do actually have pneumatics that either can be on belt packs that you wear around your waist, or it can run off of a generator or off the power of your tractor as well. So all of that is available to make some of those bigger cuts.
Now, another thing to think about, you know, pruning, of course, is a wounding process by its nature. And you want to make sure that the tools that you use to do that wounding process are clean. So it's a good practice to make sure that your tools are clean at the beginning of the day and also at intervals during the day. So in general, starting off in the morning with pruning, make sure you clean your tools. They may need to be scrubbed vigorously. You can use something like this towel to wipe plant debris off. That's the first step. Once they're clean, then they should be sanitized. And using a material like this chlorine bleach can do that job. About a 10% bleach solution is a good solution for disinfecting pruners. You can also use full strength rubbing alcohol or various other types of sanitizers. Now, if your pruning is actually targeting diseased plant parts, you know, part of IPM, of course, is making sure you don't spread diseases unwittingly, and you can certainly do that on your pruning tools. And it's a good practice to disinfect even more frequently if you're removing diseased or dead parts of the plant. Well, so looking at this bush, it has been pruned in the past, and I would say a reasonable job has been done with it. And remembering that the ideal is roughly the same number of shoots that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. Anything 5 years or older is a candidate for removal. So on a well-pruned, healthy bush like this, I usually walk up to it and think about removing probably 4 or 5 of the oldest shoots.
Okay.
And again, you can recognize those old shoots by the rough, scaly gray bark on them, and also by the diameter of the shoots themselves. So if we look at this bush here, a good candidate for removal would be this shoot right here. We'll go ahead and take it out. We try to cut as close as we can to the ground. So there's one to remove.
Wow, that took off an awful lot of flower buds, Pat.
Well, yes it did, and I try not to look up while I'm doing these shoots, these cutting of these shoots. But again, the bush will benefit from this aggressive pruning. And recognize that even though we are removing flower buds when we take off these old shoots, we're removing the less productive flower buds. And we're saving the part of the plant that has the higher quality buds on it. So that's 2. Let's see. Let's take out this one here. There's 3. Here's a large shoot right here. And then here's another large shoot in the center. You can see that our pile of brush is beginning to grow, but that's what you have to do.
You've just taken out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and look how different the bush already looks.
Just by those shoots. And I think as we assess what we've done, there may be 1 or 2 more shoots that we could take out as well. But this gives you a feel for the starting point on pruning a mature blueberry bush.
we've shown how removal of the oldest canes are going to really up the productivity, and that kind of seems like that if you're pressed for time, that might be the most important pruning step.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more, Elizabeth. And you know, especially on a farm, there's always something to be done, right? And especially if the weather's not cooperating with you, it is important to get those large, older shoots out. And once you've done that, you've opened up structure. At that point, you've already made some selection for the best quality flower buds, the ones that remain. And if you don't get anything else done, at least try to get that done.
But if you do want to really, you know, do some management of the crop, it seems like maybe we should talk about some of the precision pruning that can be done in blueberries.
Yeah, so detail pruning is important, and you definitely want to try to get that done. Now, one of the benefits of detail pruning is you can actually position the crop where it's most efficient from the standpoint of harvest, and also from the standpoint of management for problems like spotted-winged Drosophila. Most pickers, for example, are very happy if the blueberries are between their knees and their chins. That's an easy area in which to pick. And we can actually position the crop in that part of the fruiting zone by removing the shoots at the base. We really don't need those shoots. No one wants to get down on their hands and knees to pick blueberries. Also keep in mind the fruit that's down low will be in the part of the bush where there's not as good air movement, even though we've opened structure, and you won't do as good a job of protecting that fruit with your pesticide sprays. So there's no point in keeping that area if you don't need to. And so detail pruning is coming out and removing those low shoots, those inner shoots that you really don't need.
And I think we should point out that our bushes that we're actually doing the demonstration on are fairly upright. There are some cultivars that are more spreading nature, and this is even more important to try and get that growth more in an upright position as well.
Agreed. Well, should we do some detail pruning on this plant?
Sounds good.
Okay. Now you can do a certain amount of this with your hand pruners, and again we're thinking about where that crop is going to lay, and we're going to selectively remove these shoots in the center part of the bush that are low growing, that we really don't want crop that low. This process further opens up the interior structure of the bush as well. So again, you can see the process here. We're clearing out all of these lower shoots that are crowding up the center. We're removing the low-lying crop that is not very efficient to harvest or manage. And we'll work our way around the bush and get all of this material out of the way. But you can see the effect here of removing those lower shoots.
Okay, there we are. So Pat, they just saw a sped up version of you removing all the twiggy growth that was down the low, and it's just amazing how much you've given them 2 steps. Take out the 5/6 of the oldest cane. That really opened it up, and in less than 5 minutes you took out all the twiggy undergrowth, and that's really opened up the plant now. Now you said from the knees to the chin, so we're definitely above my chin. So what do we do about bushes that are starting to get really tall? These aren't really that tall for pickers, but some bushes will. What do we do about bushes that are starting to get some height on them?
Yeah, so some cultivars just, again, are more naturally upright growing and are more vigorous than what we see here in this planting. If they start to get too tall, you can actually halt that upward growth by heading back cuts on new shoots. Typically the first year that a blueberry shoot grows, it's not going to be branched. You know, there may be 1 or 2 branches, but frequently they're unbranched shoots. When they reach the height at which you want them to stay, so you know, for most of us that's going to be somewhere around 5 feet, we can cut the tip off. And that will cause it to branch down below that point. It won't grow any taller, but it will develop its bearing area then, again, in that zone that we want, right around our chins. And so that's helpful. Something else that we can take a look at too, and again, these bushes are in reasonable vigor. Occasionally with lower vigor bushes, we don't have as many new shoots, and we end up having these old shoots with very dense twiggy type growth, and it can be beneficial to come in and actually thin those little pieces out. And you can actually do that by just snapping them with your fingers. Again, that's sort of taking detail pruning to the nth degree, and most of us don't have enough time to do that, but that can be done as well with lower vigor bushes. Well, we finished pruning that bush and we've got a pile of brush, and if you take this pile and multiply it by all the thousands of bushes in this planting, that's going to be a lot of brush. What do we do with this brush, Elizabeth?
Well, we need to do something or it's going to interfere with operations, that's for sure. And so the most common methods is that you can run a flail mower or some other operation that chops it up so that it's not a tripping hazard or in your way when you're doing other operations. Another method is to actually pull it from the planting completely and take it to a site where it can be burned, and that's probably a really important option if you have disease within the planting
part
itself.
of your IPM strategy.
Yeah, part of your IPM strategy on that. And I think that we were talking earlier that when you are doing pruning, you actually try to make a conscientious decision to orient them and kind of get them centered in the middle of the aisleway. And I think that's really important, you know, for later on. You don't want to have to come back and double duty,
exactly.
You know, pulling it back together just so that you can run a mower over the top of it or pick it up and put it on a wagon to take it away. So Pat, we're here and I want to discuss the situations that would prompt you to really prune hard on a blueberry bush.
Well, you know, there can be situations, you know, for example, if there's a patch that has been abandoned for a period of time and your goal is to bring it back into production, there can be a situation where you have cultivars that just don't throw lots of new shoots. On occasion, in those situations, sometimes the best approach is to be pretty extreme in your pruning, and in fact, some cases the best approach is to cut the plant back to the ground to reinvigorate it. Remember, the pruning, if done properly, is an invigorating process, and so this bush is a good example. We look at this bush, we see a number of older shoots, but we just don't see a lot of new, young, vigorous shoots on this bush. So this bush would be a candidate for cutting back.
Okay, that kind of seems a little bit of a risky proposition. Does it always work?
Well, you know, there's few things in life that are 100%, and it's been my experience with blueberries that if the bush is otherwise healthy and it's just suffering from low vigor, that if you remove some of the things that are reducing vigor and you do this renewal pruning, you can actually regrow a healthy, vigorous bush. It doesn't happen all the time, but most of the time that'll be the case.
I'm with you. You know, when you grow blueberries for commercial production, you need a bush that's going to be productive, and that's usually what triggers me coming in to make a more aggressive pruning on them, is when I have a bush that is just not performing and I'm to the stage of I really don't have anything to lose.
That's true. That's true. If you look at this bush here, yes, there would be a few berries, but there's no young shoots, there's no young flower buds. Again, remember that the best flower buds are on those shoots that are 2, 3, 4 years old, and there's really very little shoot growth that's that age in this bush. Well, we're now in a part of the planting with younger plants, and of course the pruning approach is different with young plants.
Yeah, Pat, you know, young plants have the benefit that they don't need a whole lot of pruning compared to one that's 5 years old or older. And so most of the canes are very young, don't need any removal at that, like we saw in some of the mature bushes. So what you're really targeting is removing any of that low, scraggly growth that just is not going to be productive. And you'll see that some of the other things that you can do are heading cuts, and that is different from a thinning cut in that you cut back to a side bud to stiffen the branch up and to promote laterals like we see here on these particular bushes. One of the other features that's not necessarily pruning, but it is removal of plant material, is the bloom on a young plant. And so I'm going to say for sure that you're going to remove the first 2 years bloom after planting. So that's not 2-year-old plant, so that doesn't get you confused as to whether you got 1-year-old, 2-year-old, or 3-year-old plants put in the ground. It's 2 years after planting that you'll remove. And so once they get to, you know, this height or so, they're probably good to go to carry a crop. And you can see flower buds on this, and so wouldn't recommend removal of the flower buds on a plant this size. So this will probably be the first year this plant's going to come into cropping.
Yeah, so for the first couple years, grow the bush, then after that, grow the bush and the crop.
There you go.